It's 11:30, and so we'll leave Doom there for now. Maybe do a bit of I don't know. Do we want to talk about more Barths? Um, Actually, so I bet that Doom 2016 would probably be uh okay-ish in VR. Assuming that you can handle VR in the first place, I think Doom would be kind of okay in VR because it does have the proper field of view adjustments and whatnot. But that said, like the speed of it, undoubtedly, like it's going to be sort of pushing the limits of kind of what VR would really be. Uh, if you're on the edge about VR, Doom would be a no go. But I don't. It's difficult to sort of explain myself why, because VR is weird. There's an episode, there's a script that I've got a fragment of that I've been working on for like almost a year now that's all about VR and the gutter, like the concept of the gutter and of presence, and the fact that virtual reality is proprioceptively far more intense than any other media because there is no gutter, there is no space between audience and experience. That the when so right now, like, let's say even if you have a giant ass like 32-inch screen, like let's say you've got a 32-inch screen sitting right in front of you on your desk, and like a 32-inch 4K, and you're running Doom at 120 FPS 4K on this giant ass screen right in front of you. That's pretty intense, and it's taking up a significant amount of your field of vision. But at the end of the day, there will always be that space, that awareness space between your body and the screen. Um, there will always be something at the edge of your periphery, no matter how big you make the screen. Your peripheral vision goes all the way like out to almost 180 degrees. It's like your field of vision in absolute terms is like 170 degrees, 175, 170, 175 degrees. Now, granted, the detail that you can see way out at the edges here is like nothing. Like, it's basically just motion, but there is an awareness there. Even just that little bit of, it's like, okay, there is world out here. There is world down here. I can see my hands. I can see my keyboard, even if they are not in high definition because they're at the edges of my vision. They're still there. They still exist. And virtual reality takes that space and eliminates it. Even when virtual reality is fairly low res, the increase in intensity by losing your body is so different, that even fairly minor things in VR end up being just that much more intense. And now the main challenge in telling people about this, or in is that it's like it's really hard to demonstrate without putting a headset on someone's head and just being like, okay, check this out, we'll talk about it afterwards, like we'll have a debriefing when this is done. Um and so the space of talking critically about virtual reality feels so abstract right now, because even when you do a good job at explaining it, it's only explicable to people who are essentially already kind of familiar with it, So you're really going in and you're telling someone like, okay, what you have just experienced, here's what's going on there. Um, and yeah, so it really does need a dimension of personal experience before it's really useful to put words to all of this. Um, but yeah, I mean, so for those of you who are familiar with VR, or those of you who can at least visualize the experience, like it is the loss of the body, uh, the loss of the edges, the loss of the gutter, of of the distancing space between self and screen, uh, between person and page, that no other, and this is a thing that no other medium shares. So it's really quite, it's special. It's different. And actually, wait, I was supposed I just remembered that I was supposed to respond to someone about having a sit down this weekend about virtual reality, particularly VR video. Because so now here's the thing. Here's the other part. Here's the other part. So I'm going to give you a preview. Here's the other part of the video, is that when we say virtual reality, we're really talking about a whole cluster of different things. So you'll hear people talking. It's like, oh yeah, we're doing a VR project. And now in this stream, because we were just playing Doom, we all sort of understand that it's like that VR. What we're talking about is game, and a directly interactive experience. But there's a bunch of different related media that all use shared technology, but they interact with it in very different ways. So you have, you're using the VR headset, but VR video, stereoscopic VR video, monoscopic VR video, spherical video, is a very different experience and has very different characteristics and uses and engagement profile than a VR game. And but people, they just use VR as the terminology, when really VR is the technology. Or I shouldn't even say VR is the technology. The headset is the technology, and really we're talking about. So when we talk about VR, we really mean the headset. So it'd be in the same way that we talk about, like, oh, it's a television thing. That it's like, because it goes on a television. But in the same time, like, a console game goes on a television, and that's vastly different than a VHS cassette. And all of this stuff kind of, it's like, it becomes very challenging to talk about, because it's like, well, what do you mean? And for me in particular, looking at the way that they interact, looking at the way that the differences in what people are willing to tolerate and what they engage with and why and how differently between spherical video and virtual reality games, to me, I find that just to be like immensely fascinating. Because so here's one of the major challenges with spherical video, is that spherical video is really, people can really only seem to tolerate it for short periods of time. So it's good for it's good for sort of short news segments, short documentaries, walkthroughs, limited experiences like a roller coaster. Something you're looking at about 5 to 8 minutes as kind of the ceiling on what people will tolerate, at least at the moment, because people aren't used to it. And this will probably change in the same way that, the pace of editing today is much different than it was even back in 1980, purely because audiences have, since the invention of cinema, audiences have become more and more and more and more and more used to the language of the medium. And so you can push it farther and people don't get lost because they speak it. they speak the language, and so they're able to keep up. And so right now, there's almost no one who's actually fluent in the experiential language of wearing a virtual reality headset. And so the things that they're willing to tolerate, the things that they can tolerate, are much more limited. And so in spherical video, because you lose your body and you lose your ability to control the world around you in any way other than pivoting around a point. You know, you can't even lean forward or lean back, and have it feel like that. You can look up, you can look down, you can look left, right, like you can look around, but you can basically, you become a pole with a head on top of it, and nothing, you know, nothing else can do anything to the world. If you want to lean forward and look over something, you can't. And so that loss of the body gets worse over time. Like it has a compounding impact on the psyche over time. And so about 8 minutes right now is the limit to sort of what people are willing to tolerate. And you need to cut quite slowly. You need to be very judicious with your cuts. They need to and you really need to limit how much you're expecting people to like turn in terms of where you want to show them stuff. And the major challenge there is, if you're thinking about it, like, okay, a 5 to 8 minute engagement length, like who's gonna take a 3 pound, actually I think fully loaded, like 4 pound VR headset with a wad of cables that big around coming out of the back of it. Like it'll, like if you've seen like the Vive, like if you've actually seen the Vive and the Oculus like in action, like they've got this fat umbilical coming out of the back of them that's as thick as a loony, or it's, you know, as big around as a loony, like this big old umbilical coming out of the back of it. Like they're bulky, they're awkward, and it's like, who wants to go through the effort of getting that on to watch a 5 minute mini doc about, you know, water protests? And it's like, well, no one. Like the complexity and the barriers inherent to the technology, that it's like, okay, it's big, it's bulky, it's awkward, so you don't just want to throw it on. That is in direct conflict with the duration for which people are willing to tolerate the content. So the challenge there is like, okay, well then how do you deliver, like if spherical video is really only tolerable to people in short bursts, but the technology is so bulky that people only kind of want to go through that effort for either one-off sort of specialty things, like if it's an installation in a museum, or if it's a demonstration at a trade show or whatever, at a convention. Like it's like, okay, that's kind of a special engagement, and people are willing to then go through the inconvenience in that context. But if people are unwilling to go through that inconvenience in their own homes, if they're not going to go through that inconvenience just to watch a 5-minute YouTube video, then what? And now here's the thing is that the answer is phones. So now this is the funny bit, is that the future of VR is the cardboard. Now, I'm not saying that it specifically is Google Cardboard, but in concept it is the cardboard. There's a bunch of devices similar to this that are all out or coming out. This one just happens to be, you know, free if you can get your hands on one. But so you got your phone, you got your viewing device, and you put your phone into your viewing device, and you close it up, and then you take it and you stick it to your face. And now this is not necessarily a thing that you want to be doing for very long, because this is kind of weird and kind of awkward and feels kind of dumb. Hey, what do we have? What content do we have that people really only want to engage with for a couple minutes at a time? Now, the great thing about it is that you've got all of these phones that are coming out, and they already have accelerometers. They already have basically all of the technology built into them in order to do a rough, head tracking kind of thing. And so that marriage right there between a fairly inexpensive headset, and you can get like, I think the Samsung one is like $80 or $100. But it only works with Samsung phones. It works okay. And you can get other cheaper ones, like Viewmaster makes one that's about $30. It's plastic. It's fairly it's fairly lightweight. It's more comfortable than the cardboard and takes more phones. You do need a bigger phone, but the thing is that so many people already have these. Like, it's already a device that you own. It's an expensive device, but you already own it. And so really you're just looking that on top of that, you're adding, the cost of a relatively inexpensive headset that it's like, okay, even if you go for the Samsung one, which is, like $100, the Rift is like 600, starts at like 600. It's 800 Canadian. The Vive is $1,200 Canadian. And yeah, so that's so that right there is going to be kind of the thing that I think is ultimately going to slowly, very slowly, break people into the language of spherical video. And yeah, it's a complex situation right now, and there's a lot of other sort of weird technical problems. Like, so spherical video looks like just utter ass at anything below 4K. The resolution limitations of it are astounding, and that creates a very distinct problem again into our overall content delivery pipeline, where we're talking about, all right, the best way of kind of getting people used to this, and yes, that's a SpongeBob sticker on the back of my phone. The best way of kind of getting people used to this is phones, and that means streaming. That potentially means cellular streaming. And however, in order for the content to even be kind of like tolerable, or to actually feel good and not feel like it's just a tech test, you need 4K video. Yeah. Oh, that's actually, I should actually say that part of the reason why this setup right here actually also works is because of that resolution limitation, that for a lot of semantic reasons, it is you're a lot more tolerant of low quality, low resolution stuff when it's presented to you in a context where you would expect that. And if you're putting your phone into a chunk of cardboard with some plastic into it, and the end product looks kind of okay, but not stellar, if it's kind of low res and kind of blocky, and there's a lot of compression artifacts, whatever, you've got all of this as part of the experience that's telling you, like, hey, don't take this super seriously. And that can, somatic reasons, not Semitic reasons, somatic reasons. It changes your expectations and makes you a lot more tolerant of the of flaws in the end product. I mean, and that kind of goes for mobile in a lot of ways too. That it's like, I mean, even in gaming, people are saying that, like, that's really going to be kind of the thing that's going to break it through, is because it's like, hey, if you're playing an iPhone game, like if you're playing a mobile FPS, the fact that it's going to look like GoldenEye is just kind of expected. It's like, hey, it's on your phone. What do you expect? It's not gonna look like Doom. It's gonna look like the old Doom. it's gonna look like the older Dooms and not the newer Dooms, and yeah, so that it changes your expectations of how you're going to engage with it. Yeah, so needing 4K video, on the technical level, the reason why that is so if you think about it, so you're trying to cover a 360 by 360 degree field of view, and if you take 1080, well, standard HD video is 1080, like 1920 by 1080, so it's 1980 pixels wide, 1080 tall. Now the thing is that actually spherical video is a direct 2-to-1 ratio, so it's actually 1920 by 870, 880. My brain math is not so great at the moment, so I'm just going to do it. 960. So 1920 by 960 would be your HD spherical video. So you've got basically 2000 pixels in order to cover 360 lateral degrees of viewing. And so each degree of the arc only has about five pixels to it. So your actual forward view, and now in VR, your angle of view is actually for spherical video, your angle of view is pretty limited. It's only about 30 degrees. No, maybe a bit. No, not 30 degrees. It's about 70 degrees. 60, 70 degrees. It's about 70 degrees. And so 70 degrees at 5 1/3 pixels per degree, like you're only seeing about 370 and change pixels. So your forward arc resolution is worse than SD. It's worse than an SD television. And so yeah, so the actual picture quality in front of you is bad, even if it's a good quality, like a good quality flat image, looks awful once you've stretched it out to a 360 degree viewable arc. And so in order to actually get it, pretty good, like, so that if you want to be able to see, like, let's say you actually expand it so that it's like 90 degrees, if you want to see 1080 at 90 degrees, then so 1920 times, you need a lateral here you go. In order for every view to have the quality of HD video, you need a lateral resolution of 7,680. You need 8K. You need an 8K resolution, just under 8K resolution, in order to get things actually looking, to get any angle, like any given view to look as good as 1080 video, 1080 flat 1080 video. So that's what we're talking about when it's like, okay, well, how do you get spherical video to look good? It's like, well, what can your computer put out? And so 4K, like, this is what I mean when I say 4K is basically the starting point of where it actually looks kind of, tolerable. Like, it actually starts to look okay and doesn't look like a tech demo. Is that it's like, all right, 4K is still half that. 4K means that it's like, all right, what is uh oh, what was I was just gonna do no time. 960. It ends up being 960, so it's still worse than 720 video. So even 4K, any given field of view is still worse than 720 HD. So like the bottom metric for HD video. So it's like, all right, but I mean, if you think about it, like 720, most of you right now are probably actually, even though the stream is 1080, most of you, based on the metrics that I've been looking at, most of you are only watching it at 720. And, you know, but you think about it, 720 is really only taking up about, you know, it's a okay chunk of your screen, but when it's your entire field of vision, you know, yeah, yeah. So really, we're halfway there. Yeah, we're halfway there. Um, and this kind of tech nonsense, this kind of jibber jabber is what I spend an awful lot of my time talking about in my day jobish stuff. And whenever I go to conventions, like all of my time at PAX last year, like almost all of my time at PAX last year, was spent talking with like dudes from Google about like, hey, so let's talk about delivering spherical video. Also, and I haven't even gotten into talking about the distance between the body and the virtual sphere that the video is projected on the inside of. Yeah. So I can already feel my brain just kind of going haywire and turning into absolute heated mush. I've been talking way too fast and thinking way too hard and doing too much math after doing too much Doom and not sleeping well. So I think at this point I'm going to actually for real wrap it up rather than going on another 15-minute rant about the resolution limitations of spherical video. Actually, so no, I'm not going to sign off because all of that stuff that I was talking about with resolution, that applies just as much to games as it does to spherical video. Now, spherical video is a little bit more demanding because of the uncanny valley, because you are trying to present something photorealistic, whereas video games, as we were talking about with the fact that it's like something can look like GoldenEye, that you can use cartooning in order to temper the audience's expectations of closure. So you're asking a little bit more for them to initially achieve closure, but then it's easier to maintain over time because things don't, you know, you can suspend your disbelief because it's like, oh, that is just kind of a symbolic representation of a person, and you don't need it to look like a person. But for high-end games, you do still have to deal with that limitation that the less cartooned something is, the more it's trying, you know, the more it's trying to actually look and feel like a real space while you have that same resolution image. Also, with the added complexity of the fact that the vast majority of games, like virtual reality games, essentially need to be in 3D in order for people to really go with it. Now, they do also have the added, there are differences because if we want to get into the nitty-gritty tech details, then we're also talking about the fact that a video game is a rendered space and not a projected space. So because of that, you're not really dealing with the limitations of the projection sphere, and so you're not really creating, you don't need to create an 8K sphere around the player, but you are still dealing with that limitation of like, okay, you're trying to catch any given field of view, and so you need a 1920. You actually want a little bit more. Like, really, if we're honest with ourselves, you want to push a little bit past. So you want 2K per eye in order to give you a little bit of overscan, and actually so that you can start to fill in the periphery. So 2K per eye, 60 FPS, per eye. It's really demanding. I mean, that's why these headsets, like, that's why it all costs so much, and that's why, like, the hardware to run it is so much. Like, it's surprisingly demanding, and it's like you can tone it down, you know, but you got to tone it down in the right ways, and you got to change the way that the participant, that the audience is interacting with it, so that they change their expectations of what they're going to get out of it. And this is why it kind of comes back to, it's like, hey, it's going to be mobile. It's going to be phones. It's going to be short experiences. And that's how people are going to get used to it. And yeah. So how does Uncanny Valley apply to resolution? Well, okay, so it's sort of a misapplication of the term. The problem is that there isn't a term that I have found. I haven't found a term to properly describe a disconnect between the audience's expectations of what a visual field should look like and what is actually being delivered. So the reason why I say Uncanny Valley, the reason why I'm using it in this context is because we're ultimately talking. So the Uncanny Valley is a quirk of the process of closure where, you know, something, the closer something looks to human, the easier it is for you to achieve closure while looking at it, until it reaches a point where it is so near to human but not quite there that the disagreement between perception and expectation creates a sharp downturn in the ability to achieve closure, because something enters a stage of unreality. And we apply that specifically to human faces. And the reason we apply it specifically to human faces is because that's where it was first observed, is that, hey, if you create like a latex human face, and the closer and closer it gets to human, the more and more human, it's like, hey, it looks really, really human. And then you hit a point where it's, you know, also 3D graphics. And you hit a point where it's like, hey, it's not behaving right. The skin isn't moving and folding right. And it's not, you know, it's not reacting to light properly, and it's not, you know, the way that the subtle textures change in skin as you're watching someone, the blood flow and the capillary action and pores and just all of the little things about skin and mouths and eyes aren't behaving right, and they're not timed with each other right, and they're just doing something. And that's where we first noticed it, was in that context. But if you separate it from the human face and you're just looking at the abstract process, psychological process of achieving closure, that valley kind of always exists. It's just that the less alive something is, the more resistant it is to it. That a not quite photorealistic brick doesn't bother us because it's just a brick and we don't care. Whereas a not quite photorealistic face bugs us a lot. So the reason why I'm using it in this context is because when you're taking it and you're putting it into a motion space, like when it's not just a not quite photorealistic brick, when it's an environment that is just off in some way, that is just not quite there, when it's like trying to be photorealistic but the resolution is kind of crap, and it becomes harder to actually properly engage with it. And we don't have a term that distinguishes that from the specific phenomenon related to faces. So that's why I used it in this context. The jargon just doesn't exist yet. This is all so new. No, cognitive dissonance is a completely different, like, that's its own thing, and I wouldn't. That's so different a thing that I wouldn't use that term in this context. Even though if you went lowercase cognitive dissonance, it is in fact a dissonance between cognition and expectation. So if aside from the fact that that is already jargon, a dissonance between cognition and expectation is in fact what it is. So, um, yeah, yeah. But like I said, like this is we're pushing boundaries, and it's really cool and exciting, and I like being involved with it. But oh, 8K per eye at 240 hertz, yeah, that would be actually 8K per eye at 240 hertz would be overkill because the limitation. So the limitation of the ability to perceive resolution is attenuated by distance. So if you're talking about the distance between yourself and a television screen, like the average viewing distance between yourself and a television screen, um, the limit is around 2.5K for the. I shouldn't even say for most people it's 2K. That above 2000 pixels, like above the 2K soft standard 16:9, 2K is where people rapidly drop off in their ability to even perceive change, like progressive changes in pixel density. And there's a number of like tests that have been done in this where it's like, okay, so what they do, so here's what we do, here's what us like wacky video technicians do in order to like demonstrate this kind of stuff. So you have an image that is, you know, the maximum resolution of whatever your output system can do. So the first time I heard of this test, so it was a 4K, it was a projector, like it was a cinema projector. So it was a 4K cinema projector. And so what you do is you start off with a grid that is black and white squares. So so it's just black and white squares. So you basically split it into just quadrants, giant, black square, white square, white square, black square, checkerboard pattern. And then every couple of seconds or every second or so, the resolution of the squares of the checkerboard pattern cuts in, doubles. So cuts in half basically the thing. So it's it doubles every time. It goes in half every time. And then or you can do it a little bit more gradually. But so basically the thing is so you're watching it and you're watching the checkerboard pattern get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And the question is, at what point does it cognitively stop being a checkerboard pattern and simply become a field of gray? And you test this with different people, and now different people have different limitations. So this is the same thing with the frame rate debate of like what frame rate can you actually like see the difference in. And it comes down to like a significant amount of it comes down to training. Like people who are used to looking at this stuff obviously notice it. So like fighter pilots who are trained to have super fast visual reactions can see differences at like, 240 FPS. Whereas the average person, it's a little bit closer to like 60, 50, 30 for a lot of people. For a lot of people, it's 30. 30, 40. Yeah. And so that's where you get into all of these debates about temporal perception of resolution. But in this case, so it's like, so the physical watching it actually, like the resolution actually increase, and what point does it turn into a gray field? For a lot of people, it's actually around 2K. Trained people, up to 3K. Almost no one actually gets up to 4K resolution at a comfortable viewing distance and can still see anything other than a field of gray. And above that, like if you wanted to go up to 8K, like no, like it just stops. Like your body eventually physically hits a limit where it can even perceive the difference in increases in resolution. And yeah. So 8K per eye would be overkill. Oh, but that's of course attenuated by viewing distance, because obviously if you get closer to the screen, so even though you're watching a giant cinema screen at a comfortable viewing distance, it just looks like a giant field of gray. If you then of course walk all the way up to the screen, you can see that it is in fact still a checkerboard pattern. It's a 1 pixel by 1 pixel checkerboard pattern, but you're right up against the screen. So yeah. Yeah. All right, my brain's melting. So I'm going to thing, and that thing is going to be end of the stream and call it there. Thanks everybody for coming and hanging out. I'm glad we could have some great discussions about perception and the death of the author and kitty cats and Roland Barthes, and I'm trying to remember one of the other things that we actually stopped to have a discussion about, but I can't remember it anymore. So I'm just going to end it there for real and for actually. Thanks everybody. Have a good night.